Emily Carter pressed her last $17 into the ticket agent's hand and did not look back. Behind her, Philadelphia was burying her aunt, the only family she had left, the only roof she'd ever known. She did not cry at the graveside. She cried on the platform alone with a cardboard suitcase at her feet and a torn newspaper advertisement clutched in her fist. Wanted housekeeper. Silver Creek Ranch, Telluride, Colorado. Room and board provided. She was 22 years old. She had nothing, and she was already on the train before she could talk herself out of it. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop the name of your city in the comments below. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. The train did not care about her grief. It moved the way life moved forward. Indifferent, rattling over iron tracks that stretched through farmland and forest, and finally into open country so wide and so empty, it made Emily's chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. She had grown up in a city of cobblestones, and factory smoke of voices layered over voices of church bells and cartwheels, and the constant press of other people's lives against her own. She had never seen horizon before. Not real horizon. Not the kind that went on forever and made you feel both very small and very free at the same time. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass of the train window and watched the world change. It took 6 days. 6 days of hard wooden seats and coal smoke and the intermittent kindness of strangers sharing bread and dried fruit in the dining car. 6 days of sleeping with her suitcase tucked under her feet so no one could take it, because inside that suitcase was everything she owned. 2 dresses, a wool coat, a pair of worn gloves, her aunt's Bible, and the newspaper advertisement she'd folded and unfolded so many times, the paper had gone soft at the creases. She read the advertisement every morning like a prayer. Wanted housekeeper. Must be capable, hard-working, and willing to relocate permanently. Silver Creek Ranch, Telluride, Colorado. Inquire through Hargrove Agency, Philadelphia. She had walked into the Hargrove Agency on the same afternoon they lowered her Aunt Margaret into the ground. The woman behind the desk had looked at her the way people look at something they're trying to assess the worth of slowly without warmth. "You have experience?" the woman asked. 8 years, Emily said. "I kept my aunt's house from the time I was 14. This isn't Philadelphia housekeeping, Miss Carter. This is a working ranch in the Colorado mountains. The man who posted this advertisement is not looking for someone to arrange flowers." "I'm not someone who arranges flowers," Emily said. The woman looked at her for a long moment, then reached for her pen. She signed Emily's contract that same evening. She was on the train by Friday. The last stop before Telluride was a small depot town called Glenwood, and that was where Emily made her first mistake. She stepped off the train to stretch her legs, turned to look at the mountains rising up to the west, white-capped and enormous and almost aggressively beautiful, and missed her step on the platform stairs. She went down hard on one knee, her suitcase tumbling out ahead of her, the latch springing open and scattering her belongings across the weathered boards. A man nearby laughed, a short, sharp sound, the kind of laugh that isn't about anything being funny. Emily gathered her things without looking up. Her knee was bleeding through her stocking. Her hands were steady. "You all right, miss?" She looked up. A railroad worker, young sun-browned, with a kind enough face, was crouched beside her, helping her fold her wool coat back into the suitcase. "Fine," she said. "Thank you." "You heading to Telluride?" "Yes." "You got someone meeting you there?" "I do," she said, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. She had sent a telegram to Silver Creek Ranch 3 days before her departure. She had received no reply. The railroad worker looked at her the way the agency woman had looked at her assessing. Then he handed her the last of her folded things, stood up and said, "It's rough country out there, miss. I hope whoever's meeting you is a decent sort." Emily clicked her suitcase shut, stood up, and straightened her coat. "So do I," she said. She arrived in Telluride on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. The town was smaller than she'd imagined. One main street of storefronts, a general store, a livery stable, a barber shop, a saloon, a land office. The mountains pressed in on all sides so close and so steep, they made the sky seem like a narrow strip of something you could almost reach up and touch. The air was cold and sharp, and smelled of pine resin and horse and wood smoke. Emily stepped off the train platform carrying her suitcase, and she stood very still for a moment, breathing it in. Then she looked for someone holding a sign with her name on it. There was no one holding a sign. There were a handful of men on the platform, some meeting freight, some loading equipment into wagon beds, and none of them looked at her with any particular recognition. She waited until the platform cleared. She waited until the train pulled away. She stood there alone with her suitcase and her bleeding knee and the cold October wind coming down off the mountains, and she thought very clearly. "What have you done, Emily Carter? You the housekeeper?" She turned. He was standing at the edge of the platform, one hand resting on the post, watching her with eyes the color of dark timber brown so deep it was almost black, unreadable, and steady. He was tall, lean in the way that comes from work rather than want broad through the shoulder, with a jaw that looked like it had been cut from the same stone as the mountains behind him. He wore a dark coat worn at the elbows and a hat pulled low. He was not smiling. "Emily Carter," she said. "Yes, you're Mr. Drake, Ransom Drake." He didn't move toward her. He looked her over with the same direct, unapologetic assessment she was learning was simply the way people looked at things out here. "You're younger than I expected." "You didn't specify an age requirement in the advertisement," she said. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like the beginning of one arrested before it could form. "No," he said. "I didn't." He pushed off the post and came toward her, reached down and took her suitcase from her hand before she could protest. "Wagons this way." She followed him down the platform steps and along the side of the street to where a wagon was hitched, 2 horses a bay, and a gray, both large and calm and completely indifferent to her existence. Ransom Drake swung her suitcase into the wagon bed like it weighed nothing and climbed up to the bench. He did not offer her his hand. She did not ask for it. She put her foot on the wheel, spoke, and pulled herself up, settled on the bench and folded her hands in her lap. He flicked the reins. The horses moved. They drove in silence for a while. The road climbed out of town and into open country rolling land with scrub brush and stands of aspen going gold in the autumn cold, the mountains looming larger as they headed west. Emily watched the land and said nothing. "How long have you been doing housekeeping?" he asked finally. 8 years. "You're 22. "Yes." "So you started when you were 14. "My parents died when I was 13, she said. "My Aunt Margaret took me in. I kept her house in exchange for room and board. She died 3 weeks ago." He said nothing for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you." "You don't have other family, other prospects?" She looked at him. "Mr. Drake, if I had other prospects, I would not have traveled 6 days on a train to apply for a housekeeping position in the Colorado mountains." He looked at her, then a quick sideways look, and this time the almost smile made it further than before. "Fairpoint," he said. Silver Creek Ranch appeared around a bend in the road, like something out of a painting she hadn't known she was waiting to see. The main house was 2 stories built of timber and stone, with a wide porch running the full length of the front and a stone chimney at each end. There were outbuildings, a barn, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, a well house, and beyond them, open pasture that rolled up toward the foothills where cattle were moving slowly through the dry grass. It was big, it was rough, it was dusty and weathered and clearly needed a great deal of attention. It was the most substantial thing Emily Carter had ever been asked to be responsible for, and she felt something shift in her chest, not quite fear, something more like resolve. "The kitchen's through the back," Ransom Drake said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "I'll show you where things are. My foreman Tom Garrett can help you understand what goes where once you're settled. Breakfast is at 5:30. The hands eat before they go out." "Understood," she said. She climbed down from the wagon herself. He showed her through the house without ceremony. Front room, dining room, kitchen, a small pantry that was badly understocked, a laundry room off the back. The floors were swept but not properly cleaned. The windows were filmed with dust. There were dishes in the dry sink that had been sitting long enough to leave rings on the metal. The kitchen smelled of old grease and wood smoke, and something she couldn't quite name that wasn't unpleasant, just deeply entirely male. "Your room's upstairs," he said. "Second door on the left. I'm at the end of the hall. The other rooms are empty." "You live here alone." "My father passed 2 years ago," he said. "It's been me and the hands since." She looked at the kitchen, at the windows, at the dark film on every surface, and the dead plant on the windowsill, and the calendar on the wall that was still showing the previous January. "All right," she said. "All right," he repeated. "I'll start tonight," she said. "With the kitchen." Something moved across his face, then something that wasn't the almost smile. Something quieter, like surprise, but older. "You just traveled 6 days," he said. "The kitchen won't clean itself," she said. He studied her for a moment. Then he set his hat back on his head, turned, and went out the back door without another word. Emily tied her apron, rolled up her sleeves, and went to work. She did not stop until past midnight. She hauled water, she scrubbed the dry sink and the stovetop and the shelves of the pantry. She wiped every surface until the rag came away clean. She found a broom and swept the kitchen floor twice, once to get the surface dirt, once to get what was underneath it. She found a mop and did it again. She aired out the curtains by hanging them on the porch railing, even though it was 30 degrees outside, because they smelled of old smoke, and she didn't want to cook in a room that smelled of old smoke. At some point around 10 o'clock, she heard boots on the back step, and the door opened, and Ransom Drake came in with a look on his face that meant he'd seen the curtains on the porch railing. "It's freezing out there," he said. "They needed airing," she said. "They're going to freeze stiff." "Then I'll bring them in before they freeze," she said. He looked at her. Then he looked at the kitchen, at the gleaming stovetop, at the scrubbed shelves, at the floor she'd mopped twice. "You haven't eaten," he said. "I wasn't hungry." "That wasn't what I asked." He moved to the pantry, pulled out a tin of beans and a piece of smoked ham, and set them on the counter. "Sit down, Miss Carter." "I'm not finished." "You're finished for tonight. Sit down." She looked at him. She recognized the tone, not unkind, but not negotiable. She had heard it in her aunt's voice. She wiped her hands on her apron and sat down at the kitchen table. He cooked. She watched him. She hadn't expected a man of his size and apparent self-sufficiency to do something as ordinary as heat a pan and slice ham and move around his own kitchen with the ease of long practice. He set a plate in front of her without fanfare and poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot she'd set to brew an hour ago and sat down across from her. They ate in silence for a while. "Where are you from originally?" he asked. "Philadelphia. You ever been west of Pennsylvania before tonight?" "No." "What made you answer the advertisement?" She looked up from her plate. "I told you, I had no other prospects." A lot of women with no other prospects go to a cousin, or a church charity, or they find work in the city. They don't put themselves on a train for 6 days to go work in a stranger's house in a mountain town they've never heard of. She was quiet for a moment. "Because all of those things," she said finally, "feel like giving up. And I'm not ready to give up." He looked at her across the table. The kitchen was warm now. She'd stoked the stove before she started cleaning, and it had been running for hours. The lamp on the table threw a circle of gold light between them. Outside, the wind was moving through the pines. "No," he said. "You don't look like someone who gives up easily." She picked up her coffee cup. "I'm not." He almost smiled again. And this time, it didn't quite stop in time it got through. Just barely. Just one corner of his mouth, and it changed the whole architecture of his face. Made him look younger. Made him look for just a moment like someone who'd forgotten how to do that, and was surprised to find he still could. She pretended not to notice. She took her plate to the sink, rinsed it, hung her apron, and said, "Good night, Mr. Drake." "Good night, Miss Carter." She was up at 4:30 the next morning to start breakfast. Tom Garrett was the first of the hands to come in, a man of 50-something with a silver mustache and eyes that had seen everything and were startled by nothing. He stopped dead in the doorway of the kitchen, looked at the clean room, looked at the spread Emily was building on the stovetop, biscuits in the oven, salt pork in the pan, eggs, waiting coffee already poured, and said, "Well, I'll be." "Good morning," Emily said. "You must be Mr. Garrett." "Tom," he said. "Everyone calls me Tom." He took off his hat and hung it by the door, which no one had been doing before, judging by the pile of hats on the floor in the corner. "You cleaned this whole kitchen last night." "It needed it." "Miss Carter." "Emily," she said. "Please." He smiled, a real one, wide and warm. "Emily," he said, "I think you might be exactly what this ranch needs." The other hands came in ones and twos, 6 of them, in total, young men, mostly weathered and quiet, who sat down at the table with the careful manners of men who'd been out in the world long enough to know when to be grateful. They ate everything she put in front of them. 2 of them thanked her without being prompted. One of them, a boy of maybe 19 with red hair and freckles and a look of permanent astonishment, said it was the best breakfast he'd had since his mother's table, and then turned so red she thought he might combust. Ransom Drake came in last. He sat at the head of the table. He looked at his plate. He looked at the room. He said nothing. But before he picked up his fork, he looked at her across the table with those dark timber eyes, and he gave her one single nod. She turned back to the stove. She told herself it didn't matter, that it was just a nod, that she was here to do a job, not to earn anyone's approval, and certainly not to want it from a man she'd known for less than 12 hours. She told herself that, but she felt it anyway, that small warmth in her chest, that small particular satisfaction of being seen doing something well. She didn't know, standing there at that stove with her back straight and her hands steady and the morning light coming through the window. She'd cleaned the night before. She didn't know that he was watching her, that he'd been watching her since she walked off that train platform with a bloody knee and a straight spine, and a look on her face like she'd made a decision and wasn't interested in discussing it. She didn't know that Ransom Drake, who had not thought about anything beyond the next fence line and the next cattle count and the next creditor's letter in 2 years, was sitting at the head of his table in his clean kitchen with a plate of food that smelled like a home was supposed to smell, thinking something he had no intention of saying out loud. She's going to change everything. He picked up his fork. He ate his breakfast. He went out to work. And Emily Carter, 22 years old, with $17 spent and 6 days traveled, and everything she'd ever known behind her, started on the dining room windows. She did not look back. She never looked back. That was the first thing Ransom Drake learned about her. And it would not be the last. The weeks passed, the way hard work always passes fast during the doing of it, slow only in the quiet moments between. Emily had transformed the house from the inside out. Not all at once, there was too much for that, but room by room, surface by surface, with the same deliberate patience she brought to everything. The dining room came first, then the front room, then the upstairs hallway. She found curtains folded in a cedar chest that smelled of a woman's perfume so faint it was nearly gone, and she hung them carefully because they were clearly someone's, Ransom's mother's, she guessed, though she never asked. She found a rug rolled up behind the door of an empty bedroom, and she beat the dust out of it over the porch railing and laid it in front of the fireplace. And it made the front room look like a place where a person might actually want to sit. Tom Garrett noticed everything. He made a habit of passing through the kitchen at odd hours, not for food, she eventually understood, but for conversation. He was the kind of man who had stored up a great deal of living and liked to let it out in small portions to anyone willing to listen. "You know what this house looked like before you came?" he said one morning, leaning against the doorframe while she kneaded bread dough. "I have a reasonable idea," she said. "Like a bunkhouse with better furniture," he said. "Ransom's a good man, Emily, one of the best I've known. But after his father passed, and before that during the sickness, he just kind of stopped seeing things. You understand what I mean? He could see the cattle. He could see the fences. He could see the numbers in the account book. But he stopped seeing the house." "How long was his father ill?" she asked. "Near 2 years. Ransom ran the whole operation by himself that whole time. Then after he just kept running. Didn't stop. Didn't look sideways." Tom paused. He's looking sideways more lately. She pushed down on the dough harder than she needed to. Mr. Garrett. Tom. Tom. I'm the housekeeper. I know what you are, he said pleasantly. I'm just telling you what I see. She did not respond to that. She shaped the dough into a loaf and covered it and did not look at him. He chuckled a soft, self-satisfied sound and went back out to the barn. That was the first time she allowed herself to think about it, and she shut it down immediately, the way you shut a window when the weather turns quick and firm, no room for discussion. She was the housekeeper. She had $17 to her name 3 weeks ago, and a newspaper advertisement for a miracle. She was here because she had nowhere else to be. That was the whole of it, and she would do well to remember that. She remembered it for approximately 4 more days. It was a Sunday. The hands had the morning off. Tom had ridden into town. The ranch was quiet in the way it only got quiet on Sundays, deeply, almost completely, like the land itself was resting. Emily had finished the breakfast things and started on mending. There was always mending 6. Working men generated a continuous supply of torn seams and missing buttons, and she was sitting in the front room with the basket in her lap when she heard Ransom come down the stairs. He stopped in the doorway. She looked up. He was looking at the curtains, at the rug, at the room as it was now with the fireplace going and the morning light coming through the clean windows and everything in its place. My mother hung those curtains, he said. I found them in the cedar chest, she said. I hope that was all right. If you'd rather I put them back. No, he said it quickly. Then quieter, no, leave them. He came and sat in the chair across from her. She went back to her mending. He sat without speaking for a long moment, and she thought he might simply stay quiet, which was fine. She didn't need conversation. But then he said, She made that rug. Emily's hands stilled on the fabric. Your mother. She was from Virginia originally, brought the wool with her when she came out here with my father. Said she wasn't going to live in the wilderness without at least one decent rug. He paused. She died when I was 16. I forgot it was still in that room. Emily looked at the rug. She looked at him. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the fireplace, at something that wasn't the fireplace. She sounds like someone who knew her own mind, Emily said carefully. She did, he said. Drove my father half to distraction. He loved her for it. She didn't say anything else. She went back to her mending. He stayed where he was, and after a while his breathing changed slower, quieter, and she thought he might have fallen asleep because men who work before dawn and after dark learn to sleep in any chair in any position. But then he said without opening his eyes, You're not what I expected, Miss Carter. What did you expect? Someone older. Someone, he paused. More worn down. She pulled her thread through and tied it off. The day is young, she said. He laughed. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh, a real one, low and sudden, like it surprised him. And it hit her somewhere she hadn't been expecting, right in the center of her chest, like a stone dropping into still water, and she felt the rings of it spread outward and couldn't stop them. She kept her eyes on her mending. She kept her hands steady. She was the housekeeper. She was here because she had nowhere else to be. She told herself that 4 more times before noon. By the 2nd month, she had learned the rhythms of the ranch, the way you learn a piece of music imperfectly, at first all wrong timing and missed beats, and then gradually with practice, something approaching fluency. She knew when the hands would come in for the midday meal and when they wouldn't bother because they were too far out. She knew that Tom took his coffee with 3 spoons of sugar and would never admit it in front of the younger men. She knew that the red-headed boy, his name was Billy. She'd learned Billy Walsh was homesick in the specific way that 19-year-olds get homesick when they're too proud to say so, and she started putting an extra biscuit on his plate without comment. She knew that Ransom Drake came in from the range every evening covered in the day's work and went to the back porch to wash before coming to supper, and that he was always the last one to sit down, and that he always looked around the table once before he ate, not at the food, but at the faces, like he was counting something, making sure everyone was accounted for. She knew that he checked the account books every Sunday night at the kitchen table, and that he always ended up sitting back in his chair with his hand over his face for a moment before he put the books away. She'd never said anything about it. It wasn't her business. Until the night it became her business. She'd come downstairs for water. She'd been having trouble sleeping, which was new, which she refused to examine too closely, and she saw the light under the kitchen door and pushed it open and found him at the table with 3 ledgers spread open in front of him, and an expression on his face she'd never seen before. Not the careful blankness he wore most of the time, something rawer than that. He looked up when she came in. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't know you were—" "It's fine," he said. But his voice was wrong, flat in the wrong way. She should have gotten her water and gone back upstairs. That was the correct thing. That was the appropriate thing for a housekeeper to do. She pulled out a chair and sat down across from him. He looked at her. "What's wrong?" she said. "Nothing that concerns you. You look like a man who's been told the well is dry and the cattle are gone," she said. "So either tell me nothing's wrong and say it like you believe it, or tell me what's actually happening." Something moved across his face. "You're direct," he said. "My aunt said it was my worst quality." "I'd call it a quality," he said. Then he was quiet for a moment. And she understood this cost him something because he was not a man who parted with things easily. He said, "I'm behind on the banknote, not by much, but enough that if the winter's hard and we lose cattle—" He stopped. "It won't take much to put us under is all." She looked at the ledgers. She had always been good with numbers. Her aunt had taught her to keep accounts almost before she taught her to cook, and she pulled the nearest one toward her and looked at it without asking permission. "Don't," he started. "I'm looking," she said. He stopped. She read. The columns were neat. He kept the books carefully, which told her a great deal about the kind of man he was, and she could see exactly what he meant. The note payment coming due in February. The cattle count from the last drive. The projected shortfall if the winter losses came in at the normal rate. "You're closer than you think," she said. "Closer to defaulting," he said. "Yes, I'm aware." "No." She turned the ledger to face him. "Look at this column. You're accounting for winter loss at 15%. Tom told me last week the herd's healthier than it's been in 3 years. If you revise that estimate to 10%, that's not a guarantee. Nothing's a guarantee. But you're calculating your worst case and treating it like your only case." She picked up his pencil without asking and worked the numbers on a blank line at the bottom of the page quickly, without hesitating. She was good at this. She had always been good at this and had never had anywhere to put it. "See? At 10% loss you make the February payment and have enough left to cover spring expenses." He stared at the numbers. He stared at her handwriting, small and precise, and completely confident in the margin of his ledger. "You know accounts," he said. "My aunt kept books for the church and 2 local businesses. She taught me." "Why didn't you—" He stopped. "Why didn't I do what?" "Get a position as a bookkeeper," he said. "In Philadelphia. It would have been easier than this." She looked at him. "I told you, I didn't want easy. I wanted a life." He looked at her for a long moment. The kitchen was quiet except for the tick of the cooling stove and the wind outside. And something changed in his face, not the almost smile this time, not the unexpected laugh. Something slower and more serious. Something she felt more than saw. "Miss Carter," he said. "Emily," she said. Because she was tired of Miss Carter. Because Miss Carter was a housekeeper, and right now in this kitchen at this table, she felt like something more complicated than that, and she didn't know what to do with it, except to put her own name between them. "Emily," he said, like he was testing the sound of it, like he was deciding something. Then Tom Garrett's boots hit the back porch. They both looked at the door. Emily pushed the ledger back to its original position. Ransom closed it. Tom came in with snow on his coat. It had started while they were sitting there without either of them noticing, and he looked at the 2 of them at the kitchen table at 11 o'clock at night, and very carefully did not say a single thing. He hung up his coat, said goodnight, and went upstairs. Ransom stood, picked up the ledgers. "Thank you," he said. Quiet, genuine, Nothing extra in it and nothing held back. Just the word and everything it was carrying. "Good night, Mr. Drake," she said. He paused at the doorway. "Ransom," he said, without turning around. She understood. "Good night, Ransom." He went upstairs. She sat at the kitchen table alone for a while, listening to the snow. It was Tom who told her about the Hargraves. Not immediately. Not the next morning or the morning after. It came out gradually, the way important things always do when someone's deciding how much to tell you in pieces over the course of several conversations, until you've assembled the whole picture without having been handed it directly. The Hargraves were a family, neighbor ranchers 3 miles to the north. Theophilus Hargrave, known to everyone as Theo, which suited him less than almost any name could suit a person, had purchased land adjacent to Silver Creek Ranch's northern boundary 2 years before, right around the time Ransom's father died. He had a son named Curtis, who was 28, and mean in the specific quiet way of men who've learned to dress their meanness in manners. And Theo Hargrave had been, Tom told her one morning while she was doing laundry, and he was theoretically fixing the clothesline post trying to buy out Ransom's northern pasture for the past 18 months. "Ransom won't sell?" she asked. "That pasture runs to the creek," Tom said. "If he sells it, he loses water rights for half the herd. Sell that land, the ranch doesn't work. Simple as that. And Hargrave knows that." Tom gave her a look. "Oh, he knows it." "So he's not trying to buy pasture," she said. "He's trying to buy the whole thing in pieces." "There she is," Tom said, with the satisfied tone of a man who's been waiting for someone to get there. She wrung out a shirt with more force than necessary. "Has Ransom talked to a lawyer?" "Can't afford one. Not right now." She filed that away. She filed away a great many things in those weeks, the account numbers, the pasture lines. Tom described the legal phrases she half remembered from helping her aunt with church property disputes back in Philadelphia. She filed them away without knowing exactly why, only knowing that they felt important. That the shape of something was forming at the edge of her understanding, and she needed to know the shape before she could name it. Then, on a gray Thursday afternoon, Curtis Hargrave rode up to the house. She was on the front porch, shaking out the dining room tablecloth, when she heard the horse. She looked up. He was young, like Tom had said. Good-looking, in a polished way that felt practiced. He had a smile that arrived before he needed it. "Morning," he said, touching his hat brim. "Is the man of the house in?" "Mr. Drake is on the range," she said. "And you are?" His eyes moved over her in a way that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with assessment. A different kind than the people she'd encountered before, not measuring her capability, measuring something else. "The housekeeper," she said flatly. "Well." His smile didn't move. "Tell him Curtis Hargrave came to call. Tell him my father's offer still stands. Better to settle this friendly before it gets complicated." She looked at him steadily. "I'll tell him." He held her gaze for a moment, waiting for something. Uncertainty, maybe. Discomfort. When he didn't get it, the smile adjusted. "Much obliged," he said, and turned his horse. She watched him ride away. She stood there on the porch with the tablecloth in her hands, and something cold and clear settled in her chest. Not fear, not anger. Something more useful than either. She went inside and found Tom. "I need you to tell me everything about that north pasture," she said. "The deed lines, the water rights, everything." Tom looked at her. "Emily, Ransom's books show he's behind on the note," she said. "If Hargrave knows that, and he does men like that always know, he's not going to wait for a friendly settlement. He's going to wait for February and let the bank do it for him." Tom was quiet. "So I need to understand the property," she said. "All of it." Tom looked at her for a long, slow moment. Then he said, "I'll get the survey maps." That night she stayed up past midnight with the survey maps spread across the kitchen table, reading the deed descriptions with a lamp pulled close and a pencil in her hand, marking every boundary, every water right, every notation in the margins. She found 3 things that interested her. One of them made her sit back in her chair and stare at the ceiling for a full minute. Then she folded the map and went to bed. She did not sleep for a long time. But for the first time since she'd sat at that kitchen table and watched Ransom Drake close his ledgers with exhaustion written into every line of him, for the first time since then, she felt something she recognized. She felt like she was useful, not just for biscuits and clean windows and mended seams, useful in the way she'd always suspected she could be if someone would only give her a reason. This ranch had given her a reason. She was not going to let Theo Hargrave take it. She showed Ransom the map the next morning. Not at breakfast. There were too many ears at breakfast, and what she had found was not something for too many ears. She waited until the hands had gone out and Tom had taken Billy Walsh to check the north fence line, and then she spread the survey map on the kitchen table and set her coffee cup on one corner to hold it flat and said, "Sit down. I need to show you something." Ransom looked at her. He looked at the map. He sat down. "This line," she said, pointing. "The eastern boundary of the north pasture. Where does Hargrave claim it runs?" He leaned forward, studied it. "He says it runs along the ridge. Says the original deed gives him everything east of the ridge line to the creek junction." "That's not what the deed says," Emily said. He went very still. She pointed to the notation in the margin, small faded, written in the careful hand of a county surveyor 30 years gone. The original survey used a different reference point. Not the ridge. The old cottonwood stand that used to sit at the base of the ridge before the flood of '71 took them down. She looked at him. "Tom told me about the flood. Said your father always talked about it. Said it changed the whole look of the north end of the property." Ransom stared at the map. His jaw was tight. "If the reference point is the cottonwood stand," Emily continued, "and the cottonwood stand was 70 yards west of where the ridgeline currently sits, then Hargrave's eastern boundary is 70 yards west of where he's claiming it is." "That's not a small difference," Ransom said slowly. "No," she said. "It means the creek junction is on your side of the line. Your water rights are intact and completely uncontested. Hargrave has no claim to the pasture and no claim to the water. He never did." She paused. "Which means either he doesn't know or he does know, and he's been lying to your face for 18 months. Ransom stood up from the table so fast the chair scraped back hard across the floor. He put both hands flat on the map and stared at it and said nothing for a long moment. She could see the muscle in his jaw working. "How sure are you?" he said. "Sure enough to stake the ranch on it," she said. "But you need a lawyer to confirm it. Someone who can read the original county deed records and cross-reference the survey notation. If the records match what I'm reading here, Hargrave's offer isn't a purchase. It's a theft." He looked up at her then, and the expression on his face was something she had no name for, not gratitude, not surprise, not the careful blankness he'd worn for 2 months. Something that was all three of those things at once, and something else underneath them all, something deeper and more deliberate that she felt rather than saw. "How did you find this?" he said. "I read carefully," she said. "And I had time. Emily." He said her name the way he'd said it the first time at the kitchen table in the dark, like he was deciding something with every syllable. "You may have just saved this ranch." She picked up the map and folded it with steady hands. "Let's not say that until a lawyer has looked at it," she said. "Do you know anyone in Telluride?" "There's a man named Arthur Hale," Ransom said. "He's old, but he's good. He handled my father's estate." "Can you get to him this week?" "I'll go tomorrow morning." She handed him the folded map. Their fingers brushed across the paper. Neither of them moved for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Quiet. The same way he'd said it at the kitchen table 3 weeks ago, carrying the same weight and more besides. She stepped back. "I'll start supper," she said. She was at the stove before she let herself exhale. Ransom rode to town the next morning before sunup. Emily went about her work the way she always did, methodically, without wasted motion. Starting at one end of the house and moving toward the other, keeping her hands busy because busy hands left less room for the mind to wander down roads it had no business on. She made bread. She did the laundry. She mended Billy Walsh's second-to-last shirt, the one with the tear at the left elbow that he'd been ignoring for 2 weeks. Tom found her in the laundry room at mid-morning and said without preamble, "He told me what you found." "He shouldn't have," she said. "Yes, he should have. Emily, if you're right about this—" "I know." Hargrave's not going to take it kindly. Man like Theo Hargrave doesn't lose gracefully, especially not to— He stopped. She looked up from the shirt. "Especially not to a housekeeper," she finished for him. Tom had the decency to look uncomfortable. "I was going to say especially not to someone who caught him in something he thought was airtight." She went back to her mending. "I know," she said again. "That's why Ransom needs to have this confirmed by Hale before Hargrave finds out we've been looking. If Hargrave hears about it first—" "He'll move fast," Tom said. "Try to muddy the records." "Or worse." Tom was quiet. "Emily," he said finally, "whatever happens with the land business, you know you've already done more for this ranch than a dozen housekeepers could have done." She tied off her thread, said nothing. "And for Ransom," Tom added, with the careful innocence of a man who is being anything but innocent. "He's different since you came. Anybody with eyes can see it." "Tom? I'm just—" "Tom, go check your fence line." He went chuckling. She threw the shirt in the mending basket with perhaps more force than necessary. Ransom came back from town late in the afternoon, and she knew from the way he came through the door, straight, certain with something resolved in the set of his shoulders, that Arthur Hale had confirmed it. "He needs 3 days to pull the original county records," Ransom said, coming into the kitchen where she was starting supper. "But he looked at the notation. He said—" He paused, and something that was not quite a smile crossed his face. "He said whoever found that was either very lucky or very smart." "What did you tell him?" "I told him it was my housekeeper." She turned back to the stove. "He'd like to meet you," Ransom said. She turned around again. "Me, why?" "Because he said in 40 years of practicing land law in this county, he's had maybe 3 clients who could read a deed notation that old accurately. And all 3 of them had law degrees." He paused. "You don't have a law degree." "No," she said. "I have a very thorough aunt, and a great deal of time on trains." He looked at her for a moment, and the expression was back the one she'd been refusing to name. Only now it was closer, more certain. "Emily," he said, "can I ask you something?" Her heart did something she told it firmly to stop doing. "Of course." "Are you happy here?" She hadn't expected that. She'd expected something about the ranch, about Hargrave, about the legal strategy going forward. She had not expected that quiet, direct question delivered in that quiet, direct voice. She set down her wooden spoon. "Yes," she said, and it was the most honest thing she'd said in months, maybe longer. "I am," he nodded. Like that mattered. Like he'd needed to know that and had been waiting to ask. "Good," he said, and went to wash up for supper. She stood at the stove and did not move for a solid 30 seconds. Arthur Hale confirmed everything on a Thursday. The original county deed records showed without ambiguity that the survey notation Emily had found was controlling. The reference point was the cottonwood stand. The cottonwood stand was exactly where Tom's memory placed it, 72 yards west of the current ridgeline. Every claim Theo Hargrave had been making about the eastern boundary of the north pasture was wrong. Whether it was wrong by ignorance or by design was something Hale said he would investigate further, but in the meantime, Silver Creek Ranch's water rights were intact. The north pasture was entirely Ransom's, and Hargrave's offer was based on a fiction. Ransom came home that evening and told her first before he told Tom before he unsaddled his horse, standing in the kitchen doorway in his trail coat with the last light of the day behind him. "It's done," he said. "You were right. Every word of it." She pressed her hands flat on the table because they had started unexpectedly to shake. Not fear. Something else. Relief, maybe. The particular relief that comes when you've been carrying something heavy and someone finally takes the other end. "Hale's writing a letter to Hargrave's attorney tomorrow," Ransom said. Formal notice of the correct boundary. Cease and desist on any further encroachment claims. He stopped. Theo's going to be furious. I know, she said. He's going to figure out it was you who found it. I know that too. He came into the kitchen fully, then closed the door behind him. Are you afraid? She looked at him directly. No. He looked at her for a long time. The kitchen was warm. The supper she'd started was still on the stove, untouched, and neither of them was thinking about it. I've been trying to figure out, he said slowly, what to say to you, how to... He stopped. Started again. When I put that advertisement in the paper, I needed someone to clean the house and cook 3 meals a day. That's all I thought I needed. She waited. I was wrong, he said. The word landed quietly. She felt it everywhere. Ransom, she started. I'm not finished, he said. Not sharp, just certain. I'm not very good at this. I want you to know that before I say the rest of it. I'm better with fence posts than words, and I know it. You're doing fine, she said softly. He took a breath. I don't want you to be the housekeeper anymore, Emily. Her heart stopped. I want... He paused, and she watched him find the words the way a man finds his footing on uncertain ground, carefully testing each step. I want you to be here. Not because I hired you. Because you want to be. Because this is because I want it to be your home. As much as it's mine. He looked at her steadily. I'd like to court you properly, if you're willing, if that's not something that's... He stopped again, jaw tight, trying. I know I'm asking a great deal. You've got your whole life ahead of you, and this ranch has got debt and hard winters and neighbors who are going to be very angry in about 24 hours, and I'm not... He exhaled. I'm not an easy man. She stood up from the table. He watched her, uncertain for the first time since she'd known him. It was the most human she'd ever seen him look, all the rancher solidity set aside, and something younger underneath it, something that could still be turned down, and knew it. Ransom Drake, she said. You are the most straightforward man I have ever met. He blinked. You said what you meant, she said. Plainly without decoration and at considerable personal risk. I appreciate that more than you know. She took a breath. And yes, I'm willing. Something moved through his entire body. She saw it a slow release like a rope that's been pulled too tight, finally allowed to slacken. His shoulders came down. His hands, which had been rigid at his sides, relaxed. Yeah, he said. Yes, she said. He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and took her hands in both of his, and they were large and rough and warm, and she felt each separate callus through her own palms, and he held them carefully, the way you hold something you know has value. That was when the back door opened. Tom Garrett stood in the doorway, saw exactly what he was looking at, and turned a slow, magnificent shade of red that was entirely at odds with his 50 years and silver mustache. He said. Get out, Tom, Ransom said without turning around. Tom got out. They heard him say from the other side of the closed door with immense satisfaction, about time. Emily laughed. She laughed the way she hadn't laughed in a very long time, completely, without protecting herself from it with her whole chest. And Ransom looked at her laughing, and something in his face opened up entirely, every careful, guarded layer of him, just gone. And he laughed too low and real, and they stood in the kitchen holding hands and laughing, and it was the most ordinary, extraordinary thing she had ever been part of. Then Billy Walsh's voice came from outside calling for Tom, and the moment shifted, and she stepped back, and he let her hands go slowly. Supper's going to burn, she said. Probably, he agreed. She went to the stove. He stayed where he was for a moment, watching her, and then he went out to see what Billy needed. She stirred the pot. Her hands were completely steady. Her heart was not. She didn't hear Curtis Hargrave's horse until it was already at the gate. She came out onto the porch because she'd heard the hoofbeats while Ransom was still in the barn and she was closer. Curtis sat on his horse at the gate with that practiced smile and his eyes cold behind it, and he looked at her on the porch and said, "I need to speak to Drake." "He'll be out in a moment," she said. "This isn't something I came to discuss with the hired help," he said. And the smile didn't move, but the word was a weapon, and they both knew it. She met his eyes and said nothing. Let the silence do the work. Ransom came out of the barn. He saw Curtis. His face closed up, not in anger, not yet. In the specific controlled stillness of a man who knows the next few minutes matter, and is going to manage them with both hands. "Curtis," he said. "My father received a letter from your lawyer today," Curtis said, still smiling. "He'd like to discuss it." "There's nothing to discuss," Ransom said. "The survey notation is clear. The boundary has always been where it is. Your father knows that." The smile stayed, but something behind it shifted harder, colder. "My father has been very patient with you, Drake. That patience isn't unlimited." "Neither is mine," Ransom said. Curtis looked at Emily on the porch. A slow look, deliberate. "Interesting the things a man will rely on," he said, "when he's desperate enough." Ransom went very still. "Write out Curtis," he said. Quiet. Final. Curtis held his gaze for a moment. The smile was entirely gone now. What was underneath it was not pleasant. "This isn't over," he said. "It is tonight," Ransom said. "Ride out." Curtis turned his horse and went. They watched him go, and neither of them spoke until the sound of hoofbeats had faded completely. Then Ransom turned and looked at her on the porch. She looked back at him. Something passed between them, not words, not the almost smile, something older and quieter and stronger than either. "Come inside," she said. "Supper's ready." He came up the porch steps and held the door for her. She went through. They sat down together at the table they'd shared for 2 months now, and Tom poured the coffee and Billy passed the bread, and nobody said anything about Curtis Hargrave or Theo Hargrave or the letter or the look on Curtis's face as he rode away. But Emily kept her pencil and the survey map in her apron pocket all through supper. And Ransom kept his eyes on her, the way a man keeps his eyes on something he has decided fully and without reservation he is not going to lose. Theo Hargrave did not come himself. That told Ransom everything he needed to know about the man. He sent a writer instead, a stranger, not one of his regular hands, which told Ransom the message was meant to be deniable. The writer came on a Wednesday morning while the ground was still iron-hard with overnight frost, handed Ransom a folded note without a word, and rode back out before anyone thought to ask his name. Ransom read the note at the kitchen table. His face didn't change. He folded it back up, set it on the table, and reached for his coffee. Emily, who had been watching him from the moment the writer appeared, said, "What does it say?" He slid it across to her without comment. She unfolded it, read it. Her jaw tightened. The note was not signed. It said in plain block letters, "Drop the boundary claim. The note comes due in February. We know who holds your paper. Friendly advice: a man in debt can't afford enemies." She set it down. "He's threatening you." "He's trying to," Ransom said. "Who holds your banknote?" "First Territorial Bank in Glenwood." He paused. "Theo Hargrave sits on their lending board." She looked at him. "Since when?" "Since about 6 months ago, from what Arthur Hale told me last week." His voice was level. Too level. "I didn't put it together until just now." She picked up the note again, read it again. Then she said, "He didn't buy adjacent land because he wanted your pasture. He bought it to establish a legal foothold, and he got onto the bank board to control your debt. He's been building this from 2 directions at once." "Yes," Ransom said, quietly, like it cost him something to say it. "How much is the February payment?" $412. "How much do you have?" $280. She was quiet for a moment. He watched her. She could feel him watching her, not with expectation, not asking her to fix it. Just watching. The way he always watched, like whatever she was doing was worth paying attention to. "Arthur Hale," she said. Does he know anyone at the State Banking Commission? Ransom's eyes sharpened. What are you thinking? A board member using his position to pressure a debtor into a land concession, she said carefully. That's not a neighborly dispute, Ransom. That's corruption. If the Banking Commission knew a lender's board member was threatening borrowers to obtain property, that's a very large claim to make against a man like Theo Hargrave. We have the note, she said. Unsigned but in his rider's hand, delivered from his property. It's not signed. The timing signs it, she said. The letter from Hale goes out Thursday. His unsigned threatening note arrives the following Wednesday. Any reasonable person can follow that line. She folded the note and held it up. This is evidence, Ransom. If Hale can get it in front of the right people. He stared at her. At the note in her hand. At her. You walked off a train from Philadelphia 2 months ago, he said slowly. With a cardboard suitcase and $17. 16? She said. I spent one on coffee at the Glenwood Depot. He put his face in his hands. She thought for a terrible moment that she'd said the wrong thing. Then she realized his shoulders were shaking. He was laughing, silent, helpless, the kind of laughter that comes when the alternative is something much harder. She set the note on the table in front of him. Get it to Hale today, she said. Don't wait. He pulled himself together, picked up the note, stood up. Yes, ma'am, he said, and the way he said it, warm, deliberate, with the full weight of the word behind it, made something in her chest pull tight, in the best possible way. He rode to town within the hour. Tom found her in the kitchen 20 minutes later, and she told him everything, because Tom needed to know, and because she was tired of carrying things alone. He listened without interrupting, which was one of his finer qualities, and when she finished he was quiet for a moment, and then said, Hargrave's going to find out Ransom went to Hale again. I know. He's going to move faster, try something we haven't anticipated. I know that too. Tom looked at her steadily. Emily, whatever he tries, you know you're not in this alone. She looked at him. 50 years old, silver mustache eyes that had seen everything. Not her family, not her people, not her anything by any technical measure. And yet. I know, she said, and meant it completely. Ransom came back from town with Arthur Hale in the wagon beside him. Hale was 70, if he was a day small. Dry, precise, with the particular economy of movement that belongs to men who have spent decades in rooms where every word costs something. He sat at the kitchen table with the unsigned note in front of him, and his reading glasses on his nose, and was quiet for a very long time. Then he said, Miss Carter, you practice law anywhere I don't know about? No, sir, she said. Pity, he said. He set the note down. The unsigned nature is a problem, but not an insurmountable one. The timing, as you noted, is damning. I have a contact at the State Commission fellow I went to university with 40 years ago. If I send this with a full written account of the sequence of events, he will at minimum open an inquiry. He paused. An inquiry from the Banking Commission would freeze any collection action on the February note while it's ongoing. Ransom leaned forward. How long does an inquiry take? Months, possibly longer. Hale looked at him over his glasses. Long enough for you to make the payment properly if the ranch has a reasonable winter. The herd's healthy, Emily said. Then we proceed, Hale said as if it were already settled. Ransom looked at Emily. She looked back at him. Something passed between them that was becoming familiar, that particular frequency of understanding that doesn't need words. Write your letter, Ransom told Hale. 3 days later, Theo Hargrave wrote up himself. Not Curtis. Theo. Which meant he already knew. He was a large man, not tall like Ransom, but wide with the settled heaviness of a man who had been powerful long enough to stop thinking about it. He had a foreman with him, and 2 other riders, and they stopped at the gate, and Theo called out, Drake, a word. Ransom came off the porch. Emily came to the doorway. Tom materialized from the direction of the barn the way Tom always materialized when something needed materializing for. Hargrave, Ransom said. He stopped at the gatepost. I'd invite you in, but I don't think this is a social call. No, Theo said. His voice was flat and deliberate. It's not. He looked past Ransom to the porch, to Emily in the doorway. His eyes stayed there a moment too long. I understand you've been making inquiries, stirring up matters that are already settled. The boundary matter was never settled, Ransom said, as Arthur Hale's letter explained. Hale's a tired old man reading 100-year-old papers, Theo said. His interpretation isn't the only interpretation. The surveyor's notation isn't a matter of interpretation, Emily said. Every head turned, including Theo Hargrave's. She came off the porch. She didn't run through it in her head first. There wasn't time, and in any case, her legs were moving before her thoughts caught up. She came to stand beside Ransom, and she met Theo Hargrave's eyes directly, and she said, "The reference point in the original survey is the cottonwood stand. That is a factual statement, not an interpretation. The cottonwood stand was 72 yards west of the current ridgeline. That is also a factual statement. Your boundary claim is based on the ridgeline, which means your boundary claim is wrong by 72 yards. That is arithmetic, Mr. Hargrave, not opinion." Theo Hargrave stared at her. His foreman stared at her. Curtis, who had appeared behind his father's horse at some point, stared at her with something that was not admiration and not quite hatred, but lived in the uncomfortable territory between. Theo said very quietly, "Who are you?" "Emily Carter," she said. "The housekeeper." He looked at Ransom. "Your housekeeper," he said. "Yes," Ransom said, and the way he said it was quiet and certain, and somehow encompassed a great deal more than the word itself. Theo looked back at Emily. Something shifted in his face, a recalibration. He was looking at her differently now, not as a woman to be dismissed, as a problem to be solved. That frightened her more than the dismissal had. "This isn't finished," he said to Ransom. "The boundary is finished," Ransom said. "Whatever else you think you have to say it to Hale." Theo held his gaze for a moment. Then he turned his horse. His men followed. Curtis was the last to go, and he looked at Emily once more before he turned to look. She filed away carefully because she didn't understand it yet, and she had learned that things she didn't understand yet were the things most worth remembering. When they were gone, Tom let out a breath that he'd apparently been holding for the entire conversation. "Lord Almighty," he said softly. Ransom turned to look at Emily. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "That was—" He stopped. "Reckless," she offered. "I was going to say brave," he said. She felt the heat come up in her face and turned away before he could see it. "The boundary argument is cleaner when it comes from someone who's read the actual document," she said, moving back toward the porch. "He can argue with you all day. He can't argue with arithmetic." "Emily." She stopped, turned back. He was looking at her the way he'd looked at her in the kitchen, when he said he wanted to court her, open, certain, with nothing protective left in it. "Arithmetic or not," he said. "Thank you." She went inside. She leaned against the kitchen wall for a moment, alone, with her heart doing something completely outside her control, and she allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of it before she went back to work. The inquiry from the Banking Commission arrived the following week. Arthur Hale brought it out himself, which meant it was significant. He sat at the kitchen table. He seemed to regard it as his natural habitat by now, and read them the relevant section in his precise, unhurried way. The commission was requesting a full accounting of Theo Hargrave's activity on the lending board as it related to Silver Creek Ranch's note. Collection action on the February payment was suspended pending the outcome. Billy Walsh, who had no business being in the kitchen for this conversation, had somehow appeared anyway, and when Hale finished reading, Billy said, "Does that mean we're safe?" with such naked relief that everyone at the table softened. "It means we have time," Ransom said, "which is what we needed." Hale looked at Emily over his glasses. "The commission officer noted in a private correspondence to me that the timing sequence you identified was, and I'm quoting, unusually well documented for a non-legal submission." He paused. He asked if you'd be willing to provide a written statement. Of course, she said. He also asked. Hale set down his papers. He asked who you were. He assumed you were a lawyer. Tom made a sound into his coffee that was very nearly a laugh. I'll write the statement, Emily said. When do you need it? By Friday, Hale said. She wrote it that night. 4 pages precise and sequential, documenting every piece of evidence, the survey notation, the deed reference, the timing of Hargrave's land purchase relative to his joining the bank board, the unsigned note and its arrival date, the sequence of events from Ransom's first missed payment forward. She wrote it the way her aunt had taught her to write anything that mattered. Say what you mean, say only what you mean, and make sure what you mean is true. Ransom found her at the kitchen table at midnight, the same way she'd found him, and he stood in the doorway and said, "You should sleep." "Almost done," she said. He came in, sat across from her, didn't say anything, just sat the way he sometimes sat in the front room now, while she mended the way they had both gradually permitted themselves to simply be in the same space without it requiring a reason. She finished the last paragraph. Set down her pen. "Read it," she said, pushing the pages across to him. He read. She watched his face the way it moved through the paragraphs, the small tightening around his eyes when he reached the section about the bank board, the stillness when he got to the end. He set the pages down. "Emily," he said. She waited. "I want to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to understand that I'm not asking because of this." He gestured at the pages. "Or because of what you found in the survey, or because of anything you've done." She was very still. "I'm asking because of who you are," he said. "Which was clear to me the day you climbed off that train with a bloody knee and a straight spine and told me the kitchen wouldn't clean itself." He paused. His hands were flat on the table. "I'd like you to stay, not as the housekeeper, not just as—" He stopped, started again. "I'm asking you to marry me, Emily, if you'll have me, and this ranch, and the hard winters and the difficult neighbors, and Tom Garrett's opinions, and Billy Walsh's endless appetite." She stared at him. "I know it's not Philadelphia," he said. "I know it's not anything you planned." "No," she said. He went very still. "I mean, no, it isn't Philadelphia," she said quickly. "And no, it isn't anything I planned." She took a breath. "But neither was any of this, and everything that wasn't planned has been—" She stopped, found the word. "Everything." He looked at her. "Yes," she said. "I'll marry you, Ransom Drake." The breath he released was slow and complete, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying a long time without knowing he was carrying it. He reached across the table and covered her hands with his, large and rough and warm and certain. "I'll talk to Reverend Miles in the morning," he said. "Not until after I send this statement to Hale," she said. He laughed, and she laughed. And outside, the wind moved through the pines, and the fire in the stove ticked and settled, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called once, and was quiet. They married on a Saturday in December, in Telluride's small white church, with Tom Garrett standing beside Ransom and Billy Walsh's eyes red-rimmed in a way that he attributed strenuously to the cold, and Arthur Hale in the third pew, looking quietly satisfied in the manner of a man who has seen the correct outcome arrive. It was not a large wedding. It was not a long ceremony. What it was true. Every word of it. When they rode back to the ranch that evening in the wagon, the same bench, the same horses. Emily looked out at the land going blue in the winter dusk and felt something she did not have a complete word for. Not happiness exactly, though she was happy. Not safety, though she felt safe. Something larger than either. Something that had no edges. Ransom drove with one hand on the reins and one hand holding hers, and he didn't say anything, and she didn't say anything. And it was exactly enough. The Banking Commission completed its inquiry in February. Theo Hargrave resigned from the lending board before the formal findings were issued. The February note was paid from the winter cattle sale on time without drama. Arthur Hale sent a note saying simply, "The boundary question is closed. Permanently." Tom Garrett read the note aloud at the supper table and raised his coffee cup in a toast, and even Billy Walsh understood enough to raise his and say, "To Silver Creek Ranch," with all the earnestness of his 19 years. Ransom looked at Emily across the table. She looked back at him. She had come here with $17 and a torn advertisement and nothing left to lose. She had not, as it turned out, come here with nothing. She had come here with everything she was, and it had been against every reasonable expectation, exactly enough to save them both. Spring came to Silver Creek Ranch the way it always came to the high country, slowly, then all at once. The snow pulled back from the south-facing slopes, first, then the pastures, then the creek banks, until one morning Emily walked out onto the front porch and the air smelled of wet earth and new grass and something sweet she couldn't name, and she understood for the first time what Ransom meant when he said the ranch had a way of telling you things if you knew how to listen. She was learning to listen. She had spent the winter learning a great many things. How to read the cattle for signs of illness before the illness showed. How to tell by the color of the sky at 4 in the morning whether the day would be rideable or not. How to bank a fire so it lasted through the night without tending. These were not the things she'd come west knowing. They were the things the ranch taught her, the way the ranch taught everything, by requiring them without apology and trusting you to rise. Ransom taught her to ride in February on a gray mare named Sally, who was patient in the particular way of animals that have long since made peace with human foolishness. He held the bridle the first 3 times. The 4th time he stepped back and crossed his arms and watched with an expression of careful neutrality that she recognized by now as the way he looked when he was trying not to show that he was worried. She did not fall. "Again," he said. She went around the corral again. "You've got good hands," he said when she brought the mare back to him. "Natural." "My aunt would have been horrified," she said. "Your aunt never saw country like this," he said, looking out at the mountains. "I think she might have changed her mind." Emily looked at the mountains too. At the way the morning light hit the snow on the upper peaks, at the sheer unapologetic size of it all. "Yes," she said. "I think she might have." He took the mare's bridle. Their hands met on the leather and stayed there a moment, the way they'd begun to do, not urgently, not dramatically, but with the quiet constancy of 2 people who had decided, without needing to discuss it, that touching was a language they preferred to speak. By March, she was riding out with him on the shorter range days. Tom Garrett watched this development with open approval and the occasional editorial comment, all of which Ransom ignored and Emily privately enjoyed. Billy Walsh had recovered from his wedding day emotions and was now so entirely at ease with Emily's presence that he brought his mending to the kitchen and sat at the table doing it himself badly but with genuine effort rather than adding it to her basket. She taught him to do it properly. He was a better student than she expected. The ranch breathed differently in spring. The hands came in with more noise, more energy. Something loosened in all of them that the winter had held tight. There was more laughter at the supper table, more stories, more of the ordinary accumulating texture of people living alongside each other and becoming by degrees something that functioned like a family. Emily had not had a family, not a real one, not one of her own making since she was 13 years old. She found that she had strong feelings about keeping this one. It was Tom who first noticed she was keeping the accounts. Not secretly, she hadn't hidden it. But she'd started quietly, just helping Ransom with the monthly tallies the way she'd helped that first night with the ledgers. And then gradually, without any formal discussion, she'd begun doing them herself. Every week. Tracking the cattle count, the feed costs, the wages, the note payments, the projected income from the summer drive. She built a separate column for contingency money set aside for the unexpected, for the kind of February that had nearly broken them, and she watched it grow slow and steady, like the grass coming back after the snow. Tom came into the kitchen one evening and saw the ledgers spread across the table and her pencil moving down a column of figures, and he said, "You know Ransom's father kept those books." "I know," she said without looking up. "Ransom told me. Before that his mother did." She looked up then. Tom smiled that wide, warm smile. "Just saying," he said. It's a tradition." She went back to her figures. But she was smiling too, and she didn't hide it. The letter from the State Banking Commission came in April. It was addressed to Ransom, but he handed it to Emily when it arrived unopened, which told her everything about how far they'd come from the morning she'd spread a survey map on the kitchen table, and he'd looked at her like she was something he didn't have a category for. She opened it, read it, set it down. "Theo Hargrave has been formally censured," she said. "The commission found sufficient evidence of improper use of board position to influence a debtor." She paused. "He's been removed permanently from any lending board in the state of Colorado." Tom, who had also somehow appeared at the table, said, "Good Lord." "There's more," Emily said. She picked up the letter again. "The commission is recommending a review of any property transactions Hargrave was involved in during his board tenure, including his land purchase adjacent to Silver Creek Ranch." The kitchen was very quiet. "They're going to look at how he acquired that land," Ransom said slowly. "Yes," she said. "And if there was any impropriety in the original purchase." "That land might not be his to keep," Ransom said. She set the letter down, looked at him. He looked at her. And the expression on his face was not triumph. She'd learned by now that Ransom Drake did not do triumph. What it was something quieter, something like the particular piece of a man who has fought a hard fight and has come out the other side with everything he cared about still standing. "Emily," he said. "Don't say I saved the ranch again," she said. "Arthur Hale saved the ranch." "Hale filed the letter," Ransom said. "You wrote the argument that went in it." He paused. "You've been saving this ranch since the night you sat down at my kitchen table uninvited and told me I was calculating my worst case wrong." She opened her mouth. "Don't argue with arithmetic," he said. Tom made a sound that was entirely a laugh, didn't bother disguising it, and left the kitchen with the satisfied air of a man who has just watched something he's been waiting for conclude properly. Emily picked up the letter and folded it and put it with the other documents she kept in the cedar box in the front room: the survey map, Hale's letters, the banking commission correspondence, the boundary confirmation. The whole history of a fight that had started before she arrived and ended because she had. She didn't think about it in those terms, but that's what it was. Summer arrived with heat and work, and the organized chaos of the cattle drive, which Emily did not ride out on, that was not yet her territory, but which she prepared for with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. She laid in supplies, organized the provisions, mapped the route with Tom 2 weeks in advance, and identified every point where the men would need resupply. When Ransom came back from the drive 12 days later, lean and trail-dusted and tired in the bone-deep way of satisfying work, done well, he came in the kitchen door and found the house clean and the supper ready, and Emily at the table with the drive's projected income already tallied against the year's expenses. He stood in the doorway and looked at her, and then looked at the table, and then looked at her again. "We're in the black," she said. "For the first time in 4 years according to your father's records." He crossed the kitchen, took her face in both his hands, trail dust and all, and kissed her in a way that made the supper go cold on the stove, and neither of them care even slightly. When he pulled back, she said, "You're getting dust on everything." "Worth it," he said. Billy Walsh appeared in the doorway behind him, saw what he was looking at, and immediately reversed course, running directly into Tom Garrett, who had been standing behind him. "Supper ready?" Tom asked of no one in particular. "Give them a minute," Billy said in the tone of a young man who has learned at least one thing since February. The years that followed built themselves the way all good things build, not in grand gestures, but in the accumulation of ordinary days. The first child, Robert, was born in the spring of their second year in the bedroom upstairs, with the door Ransom had repainted, and the window Emily had cleaned the first night she arrived. Tom Garrett sat on the front porch the whole duration, which was 11 hours, and wore a path in the boards, with his pacing that was still visible years later. Ransom was with her. He held her hand through the long hours with the same quiet steadiness he brought to everything, not telling her it would be fine, not making promises he couldn't keep, just being there. Present, certain. She gripped his hand hard enough to leave marks, and he didn't flinch. And afterward, when the doctor put the baby in her arms and she looked up at Ransom with tears running straight down her face, he was already crying too and making no effort whatsoever to hide it. Tom came in from the porch when he heard the baby cry, took one look at the three of them, and went back out and sat down again. She heard him through the window talking to himself in a low voice, and it took her a moment to realize he was praying. Rebecca came 2 years later. Then Thomas, then Sarah, then Daniel. 5 children in 9 years, and the house expanded to hold them a new room, added to the east side, then another, then a covered addition to the back, that connected the kitchen to the old smokehouse and gave Emily the workspace she'd been managing without for years. Ransom never asked her to stop keeping the accounts. He never suggested she had enough to do. He never treated the ledgers as his territory and the kitchen as hers. They shared both the way they shared everything, without assignment, without scorekeeping, moving around each other in the easy way of people who have learned each other's rhythms so thoroughly that coordination has become instinct. Tom Garrett, who retired from active foreman duties when he was 62 and flatly refused to retire from the ranch itself, taught the children to ride in the same corral where Ransom had taught Emily. Robert had his father's steadiness and his mother's stubbornness, which was a formidable combination. Rebecca had her grandmother's name for her hands, according to Tom, fine and quick and useful. Thomas and Daniel were inseparable and collectively responsible for more broken fence rails than any act of weather. Sarah, the quietest of the 5, was the one who came to Emily at 13 with a ledger she'd been keeping of her own devising, tracking the kitchen garden output against the household consumption, and showed it to her mother with the shy certainty of someone who knows they've done something right but isn't sure how it will be received. Emily looked at the ledger for a long time. Then she looked at her daughter. "Your great-aunt Margaret would have loved you," she said. Sarah smiled. It was Emily's own smile, the one she'd been told her whole life was too direct, too certain, too much. Sarah wore it exactly the same way. The survey map stayed in the cedar box in the front room. Emily checked the boundary posts every spring herself on horseback, with whichever child was old enough to ride alongside her. Not because she expected trouble. Theo Hargrave had sold his adjacent land and left Telluride 4 years after the commission's ruling, and the new neighbors were decent people who kept their fences, but because she believed in knowing what was yours, in seeing it with your own eyes, in not leaving the important things to assumption. Ransom understood this about her. He understood most things about her by now, the way long partnership makes understanding a matter of attention rather than effort. He knew she needed the account books in a certain order. He knew she woke early on the days when something was weighing on her. He knew that her laugh, when it was real, started slow and then came all the way out, and that it was one of the 2 or 3 sounds in his life he would rearrange anything to hear. She knew that he checked the cattle at dawn, even on the days he didn't have to. She knew that he kept his father's watch in his coat pocket, and never wore it, but always had it. She knew that he was harder on himself than on anyone else, and that the way to reach him, when he was being unreasonable in that direction, was not argument, but the simple act of sitting beside him in silence until the unreasonableness ran out of room. They didn't agree about everything. They argued not often, but genuinely about real things, with real stakes, and neither of them was built to back down easily. But they had learned over years the difference between a fight that mattered and a fight that was just weather. They'd learned to let the weather pass. Tom Garrett died in his sleep on a January night when he was 71 in the room in the bunkhouse he'd occupied for 30 years. He died with a full stomach and clean sheets, and the knowledge Emily chose to believe that the thing he'd devoted the last decades of his life to had come out right. They buried him on the ranch on the slope above the north pasture, where you could see the creek from the gravesite. All 5 children came to the burial, even Robert, who had to ride 2 days to get there. Billy Walsh came no longer 19, no longer red-faced at every small thing, now a father himself with a place of his own 30 miles south. He cried without embarrassment at the grave, and Emily put her arm around him, the way she'd been putting her arm around him since he was the boy who ate the extra biscuit and was too proud to admit he was homesick. Ransom stood beside her through it all, said the right things in the right places, and was silent in the right places too. That evening, after the children and Billy had gone in, the two of them stayed at the gravesite as the light faded from the hills. She leaned against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. "He'd have hated a fuss," Ransom said. "He would have loved every minute of it," she said. "Don't let him tell you otherwise." He made the sound that was still, after 20-something years, the laugh she'd do most things to hear. They stood there until the last of the light was gone. Then they walked back to the house together. The children were at the table. Someone had started supper. Sarah was holding the youngest grandchild, Robert's girl, 4 years old, and already opinionated, on her hip. Thomas and Daniel were arguing about something that didn't matter. Rebecca was putting out plates with the efficient calm she'd inherited from someone and never had to be taught. Ransom stopped in the doorway. Emily stopped beside him. He looked at her. She looked at him. 30 years of it, in that look, the train platform, and the bloody knee, and the kitchen at midnight, and the survey map, and the unsigned letter, and the wedding, and the children, and the ledgers, and the cattle drives, and the seasons, and Tom Garrett, and all of it. All of it carried in a single ordinary moment in a doorway of a house they had built into a home together. "You know," he said quietly, so only she could hear, "that day on the platform, when I saw you climb off that train." He paused. "I thought this isn't going to go the way I planned." "Were you right?" she asked. He looked at the table, at the noise and the light and the children, at everything they had made from a newspaper advertisement, and $17, and a woman who refused to look backward. "Not even close," he said. She took his hand. He held it the way he'd always held it, careful, certain, like something with value. She had come west with nothing and arrived at everything. She had come as a housekeeper and become the lady of the ranch, not because anyone had handed it to her, but because she had earned it with her hands and her mind, and her refusal absolute and unwavering to be less than what she was. Silver Creek Ranch had needed saving. Emily Carter had needed a life worth living. In the end, they had saved each other. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, the whole of it.